Ooh. Kapow.
God had promised to make Abraham and Sarah's descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as sands on the beach, and so on. Which seemed unlikely as they had only one son, Isaac. However, things were looking up. Isaac's wife Rebecca was carrying twins. And energetic ones at that. The first son to come out of the womb was named Esau, which meant hairy, for obvious reasons. The second to emerge was named Jacob, or heel grabber, also for obvious reasons. These were the only children Isaac and Rebecca would have. Being the firstborn son came with a lot of perks. As part of your birthright, you were entitled to inherit a majority of the family's lands, livestock and possessions, as well as your father's status. Any siblings that came after the firstborn received significantly less. Jacob, the more quiet and delicate child, rarely left the comfort of the tents and thus chose to become a shepherd. Esau, however, became a hunter, as he was much more comfortable in the wilderness and had a somewhat less subtle personality. One day, Esau, having just returned from an unsuccessful hunt, was not in his best state of mind.
Hungry. Give me red stuff.
And Jacob did what any loving family member would do. He made Esau bargain for his food.
Red stuff! Red stuff! Red stuff!
Without even haggling, Esau gave Jacob his birthright for a bowl of red stuff. But since they were teenagers, and this is absolutely ridiculous, it might not have been legally binding. Isaac grew old and went completely blind, and so decided it was time to get his affairs in order. He called in Esau to give his son a final blessing. After Esau hunted down some tasty game for Isaac to eat. Coincidentally, Rebecca had been minding her own business directly outside the tent and overheard this. She then convinced Jacob to pose as Esau and steal his blessing, which, unlike a child's bargain over a bowl of soup, would complete the hostile takeover, making Jacob the patriarch of the family. Jacob certainly liked the sound of that. Isaac was suspicious. But upon closer inspection, it felt like Esau, and it certainly smelled like Esau. And so, unwittingly, Isaac blessed Jacob, promising a large inheritance and passing on God's covenant to make the family's descendants as numerous as the stars.
Bless me! Bless me!
But it was irreversible. Isaac had nothing more to bless Esau with but the truth. He was now his brother's servant, for the amount of time that Jacob could survive Esau's attentive service. To save him from Esau's wrath, Rebekah quickly sent Jacob off to her brother Laban. Jacob had gained nothing through his tricks, save a perilous journey to live with an uncle he had never met. Before Esau and Jacob were born, God had told Rebekah that Jacob would rule over Esau. Given Jacob's current situation, this seemed unlikely. But on that night, in the depths of despair, God told Jacob it was still true, that God's covenant with Abraham resided with him. He made an altar, thanking God. However, now that he was fully awake, he did want to clarify the details of this relationship. Jacob was happy to worship the God of Abraham as his God, as long as God protected him, fed and clothed him, and eventually allowed him to peacefully return to his father's home. Jacob took God's silence to be an agreement to his terms. Jacob finally arrived in Hebron and immediately met his cousin, Rachel. It had been a long trip. And so naturally, it was love at first sight.
There you go. Water.
Jacob had nothing, so taking a wife was out of the question. He worked for Laban as a shepherd and showed that he had a knack for animal husbandry. After a month, Laban generously offered to start paying Jacob something for his labor.
So, what would you...
Rachel!
This was wildly inappropriate, almost like asking for someone's birthright in exchange for a bowl of red stuff. But this time, it was Laban who took full advantage. In order to marry Rachel, Jacob agreed to work for Laban for 7 years. The wait was excruciating. And then, in the darkness of the wedding tent, Laban switched Rachel for her older sister Leah. Laban didn't mention, and Jacob didn't bother to learn, that it was tradition for the eldest daughter to be married off first. Jacob was furious and insisted on being allowed to marry Rachel. Laban conceded and let him marry Rachel a week later, in exchange for 7 more years of work. After those 7 years had passed, Jacob tried to leave. But Laban, aware he was blessed through Jacob, tried to keep him for as long as he could.
Think of the sheep.
5 years later, God told Jacob it was time to leave. Wary of Laban, Jacob left without saying goodbye. A smart man like Jacob would have settled somewhere far from Esau, but God told Jacob to return home. And Jacob, though scared, was now wise enough to listen. He had sent messengers ahead to tell Esau of his arrival in the area. Upon returning, they told Jacob that Esau was riding to meet him, with a small army. Immediately Jacob prayed for help, then got to work. He sent a bribe to Esau, hid half of his family and separated himself from the rest, so only he would face Esau's wrath. That night, he camped alone, just like the first night of his exile, only this time he was suddenly attacked. Jacob was not a young man, nor had he ever been particularly athletic, but he wrestled with the assailant all night. Just before the sun rose, his attacker tried to leave.
Let me go.
Not until you bless me!
Fine. Your name is now Israel.
It was a blessing and an observation. Jacob, heel grabber and supplanter, was now struggling for the benefit of others and had earned the double-edged name Israel, one who strives with God and shows himself ready to accept God's blessing. Esau had forgiven Jacob. He even invited Jacob to stay with him, but Jacob had learned caution and settled a reasonable distance away from his brother. Jacob, with his 12 sons, became the patriarch of the 12 tribes of Israel, and like his father, continued playing favorites.